My name is Peter Schweitzer. I'm currently a professor of social and cultural anthropology at the University of Vienna and a professor emeritus at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, where I worked from 1991 to 2013. My regional focus has been the Arctic since the late 1980s, which has brought me in contact with climate change research more than 25 years ago. As I'm a social scientist, this video deals with what people do with climate change. Drawing on examples from Alaska, Russia, and Inuit indigenous organizations, you will learn about how people perceive climate change, how they talk about it, and how they deal with it in their daily lives. The year 2024 turned out as the hottest year on record thus far. At the same time, if we look at the topics and results of political elections in Europe and the United States of America in 2024, we find that climate change has played only a limited role in most elections, and in many cases, parties and politicians were most successful who either deny climate change or do not consider it to be serious. As an anthropologist, it is neither my intention nor expertise to dig deeper into why these political developments have occurred. Instead, I want to talk about the Arctic. As you might have heard, the northernmost part of our planet is warming much faster than the rest of the globe. As a resident of Alaska for more than 20 years, I experienced changes in the Arctic and subarctic environment early on. Even more important, however, was the fact that the idea of climate change took hold there early on, when climate change was still far from being a matter of concern in Central Europe. In Alaska, the notion of climate change gradually became more and more dominant from the 1990s onwards, both in academic circles and beyond. This was reflected in a growing number of interdisciplinary research projects addressing the impacts of a changing climate. In 2003, I became the co-principal investigator, together with biologists, hydrologists, and climate scientists, of a large research project that explored the connection between climate change, freshwater regimes, and people in northwestern Alaska. We documented severe environmental changes, from beaver populations moving north and thereby making river water unhealthy to drink, to drained tundra ponds due to permafrost thaw that heavily impacted subsistence resources, to a few mundane joys of warming, such as children using a subarctic river to swim and play, or folks enjoying an earlier onset of thawing ground, making the construction of outhouses easier. Overall, there was strong awareness of climate-induced environmental change processes, as well as of the word and concept of climate change itself. Much more recently, in 2019, my colleague Olga Pavarasnyuk and myself conducted research in the Russian Arctic along the shores of the Arctic Ocean near the Lena Delta in the town of Tiksi and the village of Bykovsky. What was most surprising for us was the recognition that while people lived in an environment heavily impacted by climate change, the topic of changing climate did not dominate their conversations with us. Instead, the focus was on the socioeconomic problem of post-Soviet transformations, on limited fishing quotas, and harassing fishing inspectors. At the same time, Russia, as a petrostate, has never paid a lot of attention to issues of climate change. Climate change was neither considered a big topic in national discourses, nor was it seen as the source of local concern. Thus, while the physical impacts of climate change were very visible, climate change was not perceived to be of high concern locally and thereby did not become a social phenomenon. When climate change is being recognized as a social phenomenon, it can also be used to advance certain social and political agendas. Obviously, a growing concern over climate-induced environmental changes can be used by environmentalist organizations and green parties to increase their support. In the Arctic, where environmentalist movements are sometimes perceived as external voices, indigenous organizations have early on begun to use climate change as a tool and weapon in political battles. Here you can see the prominent Canadian Inuit activist and politician Sheila Watt-Cloutier, who authored the important book The Right to be Cold in 2015. In 2005, she, as the elected chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Conference, filed a petition with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, claiming that global warming caused by the United States was destroying their culture and livelihoods. In 2008, the Alaskan native village of Kivalina sued ExxonMobil and other energy companies for damages, such as coastal erosion, which would require the village to relocate. While none of these legal actions were successful, they achieved a lot in bringing public and political attention to the plight of Arctic indigenous peoples. Several hundred years ago, Europeans experienced a regional cooling of the climate, usually referred to as Little Ice Age. While some historians, such as Philip Blom in his 2019 Nature's Mutiny, have argued that these radical climatic changes also brought about the radical societal and ideological transformations that have constituted modernity, peasants and other folks experiencing these dramatic climatic shifts despaired as their worlds literally froze. Wolfgang Behringer, a cultural historian, interestingly finds a strong link between the Little Ice Age and witch persecutions. In his view, these originated neither from the church nor from the state, but from the populace through their search for accountability and meaning. While science today can provide rational explanations of climatic changes, the fact remains that such shifts can trigger emotional responses and can shake worldviews. To conclude, I want to come back to present-day Central Europe, because I believe that what I have learned in the Arctic and in history is applicable at home as well. Climate change consists of a series of physical changes that are impacting and will be impacting all our lives, no matter where we live. At the same time, climate change is as much a social phenomenon as it is a physical one. For climate change to be a social agent, it needs to be perceived and recognized as such, and not as the work of witches or other scapegoats. In Austria, the idea of climate change has entered our public discourse with force over the last decade or so. While there are other parts of the world where this has happened earlier, for example in Alaska, or not yet at all. In short, while the physical dimensions of climate change are global, although their local impacts may differ, the social aspects of climate change are still very much determined by political, social, and cultural conditions on national and regional levels. Recognizing that is a precondition for successful, unified attempts to mitigate global climate change.